And now to start the show, we'd like to introduce the co-founders of AI Now, Kate Crawford and Meredith Whitaker.
Wow. Hi. It is such a pleasure to see you all here tonight. Welcome to the 4th annual AI Now Symposium. We made it to 4, Meredith. It's incredible. So, my name is Kate Crawford, and I'm standing next to my co-founder at AI Now, Meredith Whitaker. And this is basically our biggest show of the year. This is when we assess the social, cultural, and political contexts of AI, and what that might mean now and in the future. Now, last year, we focused on AI's accountability gap, as we call it, and we reviewed a year of scandals and failures, some of which had some profound national and international consequences, starting with Cambridge Analytica. What was clear was that the lack of accountability was a real and substantial problem, and change was urgently needed. So for this year, we're going to bring you the latest in terms of the multiple interventions coming from workers, community groups, researchers, and some politicians. We have a stellar lineup tonight with incredible panels. They're going to address issues like the police use of AI, facial recognition, major lawsuits against algorithmic systems, and labor organizing in tech. Now, our speakers are going to be revealing the latest forms of opposition to centralized and unaccountable forms of tech-driven power. And, happily, they're beginning to have an impact. So within the dark timeline of 2019, there are real moments of progress, and that is what we're going to be focusing on tonight. So over to you, Meredith.
So let's zoom in on facial recognition, because this year, companies and governments ramped up the rollout of facial recognition in public housing and hiring and city streets. Some US airlines are now even using facial recognition instead of boarding passes. They say it's convenient. This includes affect recognition, which is a subset of facial recognition that claims to be able to read our inner emotions by interpreting the micro expressions on our face. But as psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett showed in an extensive survey paper that looked at all available evidence, this type of AI phrenology has no reliable scientific foundation, period. But it's already being used in classrooms and job interviews, and this is usually happening without people's knowledge. For example, documents obtained by the Georgetown Center on Privacy and Technology revealed that the FBI and ICE had been quietly accessing driver's license database. They're conducting facial recognition searches on millions of photos without the consent of individuals or authorization from state and federal lawmakers. But this year, following calls to severely limit the use of facial recognition from scholars and organizers like Kate Crawford at the ACLU, Evan Selinger, and Woody Herzog, voters and legislators started doing something about it. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals recently ruled that Facebook could be sued for applying facial recognition to users' photos without consent. They called it an invasion of privacy. San Francisco signed the first facial recognition ban into law in May, thanks to a campaign led by groups like Media Justice. This was followed by 3 more cities, and now there's a presidential candidate promising a nationwide ban. Major musicians are demanding to cancel facial recognition at music festivals, and there's a federal bill called the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act, targeting facial recognition in public housing. Pushback is also happening in Europe. A UK parliamentary committee called for trials of facial recognition to be stopped until a legal framework is established. And a test of these tools by police in Brussels was recently found to be unlawful. But of course, these changes take a lot of work. And we're honored to have organizers Trenae Moran and Fabian Rogers from the Ocean Hill-Brownsville neighborhood with us tonight. They are leaders in their Tenants Association, and they worked with Mona Patel of Brooklyn Legal Aid to oppose their landlord's attempt to install facial recognition entry system in their building. Their work is informing new federal regulation. But let's be clear, this is not a question of needing to perfect the technical side or of ironing out issues of bias. Even perfectly accurate facial recognition will produce disparate harms, given the racial and income-based disparities of who gets surveilled, tracked, and arrested. Or, as Kate recently wrote in Nature, debiasing these systems is not the point. They're dangerous when they fail, and they're harmful when they work.
And one of the other things that's been really good to see this year is This shift away from a narrow focus on technical debiasing of AI towards a more substantive focus on justice. And this has in part been driven by the fact we've had so many troubling examples. Take this one, for example. Former Governor Rick Snyder of Michigan, also a former tech executive, and the person who presided over the Flint water crisis. He decided to install a statewide automated decision system called MIDAS. Now, MIDAS was designed to automatically flag workers suspected of benefits fraud. And, of course, they decided to cut costs by firing the entire fraud detection division. Turns out, though, that the MIDAS system was wrong 93% of the time. I kid you not. It falsely accused initially 20,000 residents. That number has now gone over 40,000, prompting many bankruptcies and even suicides. But MIDAS was just one part of a larger set of austerity policies focused on scapegoating the poor. So we are particularly honored to have Jennifer Lord with us tonight. She is the civil rights attorney who sued on behalf of the people whose lives were upended by the MIDAS system. She fought the MIDAS case all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court. But at every step of the way, she faced political resistance. And tonight, she's going to give us the full map of why this is a much more complex problem than just a failed technical system. These issues are always much deeper than just code and data. Another example comes from AI Now's own Rashida Richardson, who led a research project examining the connection between everyday police work and predictive policing systems. Her and her team found that many police departments across the US are actually using tainted records that come from racist and corrupt policing that are then feeding into predictive policing systems. Now, clearly, correcting for bias in a case like this isn't going to be a matter of removing a variable from your data set. It actually requires changing police practices that make this data to begin with. And this is something that the researcher Christiane Lum of the Human Rights Data Analysis Group has shown in her groundbreaking work on why algorithms can amplify discrimination in policing. So we're particularly delighted that she's also going to be joining us here tonight. Now, on the same panel, we have RUHA Benjamin of Princeton University, who recently dropped these two books just this year called Race After Technology and the edited collection Captivating Technology. Clearly an overachiever. Alongside scholars like Dorothy Roberts and Alondra Nelson, she powerfully examines the politics of classification and how race is used to justify social hierarchies and how these logics are now feeding into AI. It's going to be an amazing discussion tonight.
Kate and Trevor Paglin also interrogated the politics of classification recently in their Training Humans show, which was the first major art exhibition that looked at the training data used to create machine learning systems. The show examines the history and logics of AI training sets, from the first experiments in 1963 by Woody Bledsoe, through to the most well-known and well-used benchmark sets like Labeled Faces in the Wild and ImageNet. Now, ImageNet Roulette is a video installation, an app that accompanied their show. You may have seen it when it went viral last month after millions of people uploaded their photos wondering how they would be classified by ImageNet. And this is actually a question with significant implications because ImageNet is the canonical object recognition dataset. It has done more than any other to shape the AI field. So here's an idea. Kate, I thought I'd run a picture of us through ImageNet Roulette. Uh-oh. And there's never a good time to tell you, but you are a news reader, and my passion is welding.
At least it's good to know.
Yeah, therapy works. But some description.
This is a good one.
We chose a couple of hilarious examples because this is a family show, but some descriptions are a lot less amusing. ImageNet is filled with extremely problematic classifications, and many of them are flatly racist and misogynist. So ImageNet Roulette provided an interface for people to really see how AI systems classify them, exposing the thin and highly stereotyped categories they apply to our complex and dynamic world. This is another reason why art and research together can sometimes have more of an impact than either alone, making us consider who gets to define the categories we're put into, and with what consequences.
So these issues of power, classification, and control are at the foreground of the large-scale rollout of corporate surveillance systems across the US this year. Take Amazon Ring. This is a surveillance video camera and doorbell system that is designed so that people can have 24/7 CCTV video footage of their homes and also their neighborhoods. Now, it's just been revealed that Amazon is partnering with over 400 police departments across the country, but they're also asking police to convince residents to buy the system, which, if you think about it, is a little bit like turning cops into door-to-door surveillance salespeople. But as part of the deal, Amazon gets ongoing access to video footage, and police get access to this. This is an online portal of Ring videos that they can use whenever they want, no subpoena necessary. So the company has already filed a patent for facial recognition in this space, indicating that they would like the ability to compare subjects on camera with a database of suspicious persons, effectively creating a nationwide surveillance system of homes across the country. But Ring is just one part of a much bigger problem. As academics like Berku Baykart, Molly Sauter, and AI Now fellow Ben Green have shown, this techno-utopian rhetoric of smart cities is hiding much deeper issues of inequality. And now, communities are actually starting to take this on. In San Diego, residents protested the installation of 12,000 facial recognition light pole cameras at exactly the same time as Hong Kong protesters were pulling down their own so-called smart lamp posts and also using lasers and gas masks to try and confound surveillance cameras. And in June this year, students and parents in Lockport, New York, protested against a facial recognition system in the school that would have given the district the ability to track and map any student or teacher at any time. The district actually decided to pause this effort after the protests. Now, building on the fights against tech companies reshaping cities, from Sidewalk Toronto's waterfront project to Google's expansion into San Jose, researchers and activists are showing these connections between tech, infrastructure, and gentrification. And this picture behind me comes from the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project. It's led by AI Now postdoc Erin McElroy, and she's been documenting this for years. And of course, in February, right here in New York, a large coalition pushed Amazon to abandon its second headquarters in Queens. Now, leaked comments from an Amazon executive revealed that they were particularly worried that the protesters would start linking these issues around real estate to their labor practices and to their contracts with ICE. So it's another reminder of why these are multi-issue campaigns, particularly given that tech companies have interests across so many different sectors. Now, one of the most unaccountable and abusive contexts for these tools is, of course, at the US southern border, where AI systems are currently being deployed by ICE and Custom and Border Patrol. Right now, there are 52,000 immigrants confined in jails, prisons, and other forms of detention, with another 40,000 homeless on the Mexico side of the border, waiting to make their asylum cases. Already, 7 children have died in ICE custody. It's hard to overstate the horror of what is happening there right now. But thanks to a major report by the advocacy organization Mahente, we know that companies like Amazon and Palantir are providing the engine for ICE's deportation. But people are pushing back. Already, over 2,000 engineering students from dozens of universities have signed a public pledge not to work with Palantir, and there have been near weekly protests at the head offices of tech companies. So, this means we're particularly honored tonight to have Mahente's executive director, Marissa Franco, who is behind this report, and she's a leader in the No Tech for ICE movement.
Of course, problems with structural discrimination along lines of race, class, and gender are on full display when we examine the AI field's growing diversity problem. In April, AI Now published Discriminating Systems, research led by AI Now postdoc Sarah Myers-West. This showed a feedback loop between the discriminatory culture in AI and the bias and skews embedded in AI systems. And the findings were alarming. Just as the AI industry established itself as a nexus of wealth and power, it became more male and more homogeneous. There's clearly a pervasive problem across the field. And there's also growing calls for pushback. Whistleblower Sinead Swenson and journalist Ronan Farrow helped reveal a fundraising culture at NYU, jokes on us.
MIT, I
I love NYU. It's at MIT that this fundraising culture
think. Good catch.
puts status and money. So sorry, Katie, the provost. I'm going to rewind that and say whistleblower Sinead Swenson and journalist Ronan Farrow helped reveal a fundraising culture at MIT that put status and money above the safety of women and girls. One of the first people to call for accountability was Kenyan graduate student Arwa Mboya. Her call for justice fit a familiar pattern in which women of color without much institutional power are the first to speak up. But of course, MIT isn't alone. We've seen a series of walkouts and protests across multiple tech companies, from the Google walkout to Riot Games to Microsoft workers confronting their CEO, demanding an end to racial and gender inequity at work. And as you may have heard, I left Google earlier this year. Let's just say I became increasingly alarmed by the direction of the industry. Things were getting worse, not better, and the stakes, as you all know, are extremely high. So a few years ago, my colleagues and I started organizing around harmful uses of AI and abuses in the workplace. We were taking a page from teachers' unions and others who've used their collective power to bargain for the common good. This work was also informed by our research and the scholarship of so many others that served as an invaluable guide to political action and organizing. And along the way, we had some major wins. The tech movement grew, and we had some experiences that highlighted the kind of opposition those who speak up often face. Now, happily, I am now part of AI Now, full-time.
Woo!
It was a long year.
Oh yeah.
Now, contract workers are a crucial part of this story. And in many, many ways, they carve the path. They make up more than half the workforce at many, many tech companies, and they don't get the full protections of employment, often earning barely enough to get by and laboring on the sidelines of industry. Work from scholars like Lilia Rani, Sarah Roberts, Jessica Bruder, and Mary Gray, among many others, help draw attention to these shadow workforces. Now, AI platforms used for worker management are also a growing problem. From Uber to Amazon warehouses and well beyond, these massive automated platforms direct worker behavior, they set performance targets, and they determine wages, giving workers very little control. Now, earlier this year, for example, Uber slashed worker pay without explanation or warning, just quietly implementing a change via an update to their platform. Poof, you make 25% less. Meanwhile, drivers for delivery company DoorDash revealed that the company was quite literally stealing the tips customers thought they left for them in the app. But happily, we've also seen some big wins for these same workers. Rideshare workers in California had an enormous victory with the AB5 law, which requires app-based companies to provide drivers the full protections of employment. It's a monumental change from the status quo, and to discuss this significant moment, Professor Veena Dubal is joining us tonight. She's a leading academic studying the gig economy, and she's worked with drivers and activists for years. Now, on the East Coast, BHAIRAVI DESAI heads the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. This is a union she founded in 1998 that now has over 21,000 members. And BHAIRAVI led one of the first campaigns to win against rideshare companies, and she's going to discuss that work with us tonight. Now, finally, we're honored to have Abdi Muzay on the same panel. He's the executive director of the Awood Center outside of Minneapolis. He's a veteran labor organizer who worked with Amazon warehouse workers in his community to bring this famously resistant company to the table and to get concessions that improve their lives. So it's going to be an amazing panel.
And of course, the backdrop to all of this is the climate, because planetary computation is starting to have real planetary impacts. Now, AI is very energy intensive, and it uses a huge amount of natural resources. The researcher Emma Strubel from Amherst dropped this shocking new paper this year that revealed the carbon footprint of training an AI system. Her team showed that to create just one AI model for a natural language processing system can emit as much as 600,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. So to give you some context, that's about the same amount as 125 round-trip flights between New York and Beijing. So the carbon footprint of large-scale AI is often hidden behind abstractions like the cloud. But in reality, this type of computational infrastructure is currently estimated to emit more carbon than the entire aviation industry. That is a dramatic percentage of global emissions. But here too, we're starting to see growing opposition. Just this month, we saw the first ever cross-sectoral worker action in tech, where tech workers committed to strike for the climate. They demanded zero carbon emissions from big tech by 2030, zero contracts with fossil fuel companies, and for companies not to deploy their technology in ways that will harm climate refugees. And here you can start to see the connections between the use of AI at the border and the movement for climate justice. These are deeply interconnected issues, as you're going to be seeing on stage tonight. So let's close it out by looking at the full visual timeline of this year and bringing all of these themes together.
So you can see, no doubt, there's a growing wave of pushback emerging, from rejecting the idea that facial recognition is inevitable, to tracing tech power across spaces in our homes and cities. An enormous amount of significant work is underway. And it's clear that the problems raised by AI are social, cultural, and political, as opposed to primarily technical. And these social and political issues, from criminal justice to worker rights to racial and gender equity, have a long and unbroken history. So those of us concerned with the implications of AI need to seek out and amplify the people already doing this work and learn the histories and practices of those who've led the way. Now, the pushback that defined 2019 reminds us that there is still a window of opportunity to decide what types of AI are acceptable and how to make them accountable. And the people you'll hear from on stage tonight are on the front lines of creating this real change, researching, organizing, and pushing back across multiple domains. They share a common commitment to justice and a willingness to look beyond the hype and ask who benefits from AI, who is harmed, and who gets to decide. So with that, we're delighted to kick off the symposium with our first panel on AI and the police state. This will be chaired by AI Now's incoming executive director, Andrea Nils-Sanchez, and we could not be more delighted to introduce her to you and to have such a brilliant lawyer, strategist, and advocate for immigrant rights on our team. So please make her welcome, and let's start the show.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you to Meredith and Kate, and just acknowledge how thrilled I am that I'm soon to be able to call them and the incredible AI Now staff that put this event together, my colleagues, in a couple of weeks. I'm very fortunate. For me, this panel is a really meaningful way to start my time at AI Now because it touches on two issues that have been a huge part of my work. I spent the first formative years of my career working on immigration, and I was just a few months into my time at the United Food and Commercial Workers Union when the Bush administration decided to conduct what at the time was some of the largest immigration raids our nation had ever seen. And they happened in our meatpacking plants. So what that meant for me was that I was able to see for myself how ICE's efforts disproportionately affected, and that is an understatement, our Latino union members, and how ICE treated members of my own community like animals. Later on, as a lawyer, I also got involved in criminal justice issues. I litigated a case against the California Board of Parole, and I served on a local bar association's criminal justice task force. But one thing that will always sit with me is that familiar sense of injustice and the pit I felt in my stomach when I sat in a criminal courtroom proceeding for the first time and watched one black or brown defendant after another being brought in chains to be arraigned. It was the same visceral reaction I had during the ICE raids. And that's when I realized just how interconnected the immigration and criminal justice issues are. Communities of color have been bearing the unjust burden of discriminatory policies and biased decision makers basically since the birth of our nation. They've also broadly endured racial profiling, excessive force, and the killing of unarmed civilians, both at the hands of local police and immigration agents, especially at the border. Meanwhile, it's important to keep in mind during this panel that half of all federal arrests are immigration-related, which effectively makes our federal criminal justice system a deportation pipeline. So this isn't just a panel about the use of AI by the police state. It's about how the government is injecting an unreliable technology that is often biased in and of itself into policing contexts that are completely riddled with discrimination and with zero guardrails. The only guardrails are the folks you're going to see on stage tonight. So this panel also couldn't be more timely. I'm sure many of you saw the New York Times Magazine article that came out this morning detailing how ICE relies on big data and AI to track, hunt, and I quote, disappear Spanish-speaking families. So how AI technology can reflect and perpetuate the inequities and injustices in our society, in case you can't tell, is one of the topics I am most passionate about tackling at AI Now. And it is why I'm so glad I'm going to get the chance to learn from the 3 bold and brilliant women that I'm about to introduce and hear more about how they're pushing back. Marisa Franco is the director and co-founder of Mi Gente. RUHA Benjamin is the associate professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. And Christian Lum is the lead statistician at the Human Rights Data Analysis Group. And it should be out in just a second. Okay, it sounds like we're having some mic issues.
Her mic.
Stage. But I think we can get started with RUHA, and I think I'd just love for, I'd love for each of you to discuss your work around the use of AI and in policing and immigration, and explain for us why this is a problem that caught your attention in the first place. RUHA, should we start with you?
Sure. So what caught my attention a few years ago was the proliferation of headlines and hot takes about so-called racist robots and other forms of machine bias that framed problems of AI and automated discrimination as if it were mainly a problem of technology gone wrong, rather than about a society that's been wrong. So one of the things I set out to do, along with a number of folks in this room, is to broaden the frame of discussion, expanding the problem space from racist robots to racist societies and unjust structures that materialize in harmful technology. Because what we're fighting for, I think, is not only the power to shape our material and virtual world, but the ability to shape the intellectual and imaginative space to define what problems need addressing in the first place. The fact is, we can't accept the problem space as defined by those who currently monopolize power and resources, because then we're forced to maneuver on a terrain created by others, made to play by someone else's rules, and forced to choose between faulty choices. For example, when it comes to carceral technologies like electronic shackles and GPS monitoring, if the powers that be present the option, we will either warehouse people in cages or track and surveil them using high-tech monitoring systems. If these are the only choices, many people will rightly insist that the freedom to move around outside of a cage is better and the more humane option. Never mind the violent constraints and stigma that come with it. This is what I mean about defining the problem space, to limit the available options and call it reform and betterment, which is why we have to always ask what alternatives are being left off the table. What really is the issue? Is it risky individuals who need monitoring, or risk-producing institutions that create social disorder, precarity, and penalize those who are forced to navigate systems designed to entrap them? So the task, as I see it, is not only to critique and oppose carceral technologies, however important, but to seed new forms of social organization that eventually make our current punishment system superfluous. We have to hone our creative capacity to enact these alternatives as much as we sharpen our critical capacity to diagnose the harm and violence of our current reality. And the good news is that we can draw on a long tradition of abolitionist visionaries who refused to cede, C-E-D-E, the problem space. And I think what the task now is for all of us to figure out how we're going to build on this tradition. Thank you.
Christiane, I'd love for you to tackle that question. I'd also would love to hear more about your research. And I took a look at some of the papers you authored and saw that you uncovered that Black defendants were twice as likely and Hispanic defendants 1.5 as likely as white defendants to be made ineligible for supervised release, and that was based on an automated risk assessment tool. You also found that allowing a predictive policing algorithm to allocate police forces would result in disproportionate policing of low-income communities and communities of color, which would target Black people at twice the rate of whites. I'd love to hear more. How have you examined the AI systems that are being used in criminal justice to retrieve data like this? And what are some of the most surprising things you've learned? And how does this sort of research reveal avenues for pushing back against the tech space?
Right, great, thank you for that question. I guess I would start by saying that is an awfully hard act to follow. And I should also start by saying that I am a statistics nerd, so it's probably going to be a little bit less powerful coming from a statistics nerd, for coming from my statistics nerd self. But yeah, so a big thrust of my past work has been revealing how predictive technology in criminal justice does have the potential to disparately impact communities of color. And these numbers that you've just said, that people could be up to Black people could be up to 2 times as likely to be the recipients, not recipients, probably not the right word, but the subjects of targeted policing, and 1.5 times as likely to be denied entry to what is likely a beneficial program. These are things that really catch people's attention. And I totally understand why, right? You hear those numbers and it's in a lot of ways horrifying to feel that like technology that's being deployed purportedly in the public interest is maybe harming communities in that way. But when I really start to think back on my recent work, in addition to revealing the very particular numbers and sort of revealing those figures, I think some important takeaways have been maybe a little bit more abstract or general. And I thought maybe I could go into a couple of those in terms of how my research sort of intersects with ways to push back. And so I think the first main takeaway I hope people take from my work is that data is not objective. And of course, many of us know that. I think many of us on this stage tonight are going to talk about that. I think we unfortunately are just right back there, so I didn't hear the whole opening thing, but I assume they also mentioned that. But especially when we're talking about data that was created by the criminal justice system with its history of inequality, data encodes all kinds of very human decisions, like the decision to stop a person, or the decision to arrest a person, or even the decision to report something to the police to try to get them to respond to it. On top of it, it encodes larger institutional policies, like where to patrol, whether certain areas should be over-policed, under-policed, what sorts of enforcements to prioritize relative to others. And it encodes different sorts of laws that have had discriminatory impact, like drug laws that drew arbitrary distinctions between different classes of drugs that disproportionately penalized communities of color. And all of this gets baked into the data. And when a model is developed using this data, it learns those patterns, to make those predictions, and it can reproduce much of the inequality that we see today. And I think probably most disturbingly, based on those predictions, because they come off as objective, it can then be used to justify the continued weight of the criminal justice system against the communities that have most been subject to its abuse in the past. And in that case, sort of using that idea that the data itself is not objective, I think that is one sort of strong avenue to really push back. But that sort of calls for like a wholesale rejection, right? And I think there are other ways to push back as well. And I think this may be, I want to say I totally agree with you on expanding the decision space. So maybe this sounds a little bit more moderate than what you're saying. But of course, the world is complicated. The world's nuanced. And I think there are other ways to push back that involve engaging directly with the technology, sort of acknowledging that the world is where it is today. There are some things that are in use and we have to deal with sort of harm reduction in the environment that we are in today. And so one area that I've been working on lately that you mentioned just now is risk assessment. And for those of you that haven't been following this over the past several years, this has been a really hot topic issue. And so, and particularly in the context of pretrial reform, these are models that are used to make predictions about whether a person is likely to fail to appear for their court dates if they're released, or whether they're likely to be rearrested if they're released. And then based on those predictions, a recommendation is made usually to a judge about whether the person should be released without conditions, or maybe what conditions they should be released under, or in extreme cases that maybe they shouldn't be released. And when I said the thing is really complex and nuanced, and from where I've been sitting, it seems like you know, everything I said before, the data is encoding all these terrible things. We can't totally scrub those things from the data, right? And so it is embedding a lot of these problems. But the other thing I'm seeing is that in a lot of legislation that's coming out, risk assessment is sort of buried into it, right? It's coming about, it's sort of the legislation that, of things we really like, things that get rid of bail, things that really decrease the number of people who can be detained at all. Included in that is some provision for risk assessment or some direct mandate for risk assessment. And so what my sort of working hypothesis is here in this case is that, you know, risk assessment is in some way greasing the rails to get through these really large legislative changes that benefit a lot of people, because it's sort of making this maybe this promise that, look, we are going to start releasing a lot of people. We're going to undo a lot of this harm by, like, of bail, right? But we have to sort of, maybe not we have to, but a concession is made that we're going to include this sort of tool. So in that case, I think it does make sense to engage directly with the tool and try to figure out ways to reduce the harm of the tool. But I think we can't really do that if the tools are sort of held on a pedestal because they, you know, they're coming from a computer, essentially. And so, this sort of brings me to my second main takeaway, which is the importance of demystifying the models and how they're created. And I think what's important to understand is that all these models are really an instantiation of a policy. And when people hear a policy like, hey, we're going to automatically release, there's going to be no option to detain, say, anybody, or very little option to set bail for anybody who, say, is charged with a misdemeanor, people feel empowered to argue with that. They might say something like, hey, that still leaves far too many cases where you even have that option. I think we should expand that. I think it should be anybody who has been charged with a misdemeanor or any other number of crimes, right? People feel that they can argue with that. And when people hear something like, okay, anybody who has less than 10 points against them, those are the people who we can release, and those 10 points are coming from a computer model, I think people feel less empowered to sort of argue with where those 10 points come from. But the thing is, well, one, even though those 10 points are sort of maybe inspired by a computer model, if you really knew how the sausage was made, you'd come to realize that these are things you really can argue with. So in a recent example I was looking at, it really did come down to really simplify a complicated issue or a complicated process, people sitting in a room deciding that if you were young, that counts against you 4 points instead of 6. And I think if people knew that, if people realized that these are very human decisions going into building these automated systems, they would feel empowered to push back against that. And even in other cases, even when it isn't just people sitting in a room, there are really consequential decisions that are being made about you know, how things are being counted against people in these cases. So for example, you know, should arrests for prior activity, for prior behavior that have now been decriminalized, should those count against you now? In some cases, those are still counted against you in the model, and I think people should feel empowered to be like, hey, this isn't right. But on top of all of this, and this is the most important piece where I think people can really push back, is that on top of the tech aspect, on top of the computer model, is a layer of policy. And I think what we're really seeing is bad policy, even more so than bad tech in this case, because the policy is what gets us from, here's a prediction, now what are we going to do about it, right? And so when we see a tool, say, recommending only maybe like 40% of people for release or 50% of people for release, that's a really easy one to argue with. That's really easy to say, look, that's policy. That's not science. And this policy is bad because we need more decarceration. And so, yes, I think there's sort of two avenues for pushing back. That's sort of my conclusion here. It's not as quite as powerful at the end here, but you know, I think there are two ways to push back here. One, the sort of wholesale rejection, but two, to engage directly with the tools, sort of work on ways to make them less harmful, and really feel empowered to critique and push for ways to make them better and fairer.
So we've learned from Christiane a bit about how the sausage is made, and we've heard some of those jaw-dropping statistics. Marisa, we've also seen the immigration headlines, the one from this morning, also the ones we've all heard about, the children being separated from their parents, kids in cages, travel bans, a hate-fueled gunman targeting Mexicans in El Paso, refugees being turned away at the border. The list goes on. And I know for you, these aren't just headlines, they are very much your reality. So could you tell us more about how AI and tech figure into the situations the communities you work with are confronting?
Sure. So I'll start with Mi Gente is a social justice and organizing hub for Latinx people here in the United States. So some of the work we do is base building. We talk about building a political home for Latinos and Latinas here in the United States. We use media and technology to tell our own story on our own terms. And most importantly, we are building a fighting machine to address the issues of our time. And clearly one of the issues for, one of the most pressing issues for Latinx people in the United States today is immigration. So we come out of, you know, a lot of us, the folks that started Mi Gente, were part of a campaign called Not One More. And that campaign was working on individual cases of deportation. We were advocating for action at the federal level to stop deportations, and we were running campaigns at the local level to try to address policies that would impact immigrant communities. And one of the most important things about that work is that, you know, you have to watch the patterns. And someone like me, you see me here, if you see some pictures of me somewhere, you're gonna see I'm probably not this cleaned up, I'm in the street, you're doing the bullhorn thing. And I would be considered maybe extreme by immigration and customs enforcement. But the fact of the matter is that the only extreme, the institution with the extreme views is actually ICE. Because ICE's stated mission is to deport all undocumented people from this country, all 11 million. Those that work with you, that are part of your family, that love you or you love them, you go to school with them, you're in a community with them. And that is their objective. They have a problem. Their problem is they have probably less than 10,000 agents. And so the fight over the last several years has been they have a logistical problem. And so where it started was, we only have 10,000, let's start working with local police. There's a hell of a lot of police in this country. So let's start using them. Let's have government agencies share data. Data they don't got no business sharing, but let's share it because government agencies should be talking to each other, right? And so for many years in the immigrant rights movement, the fight was, what is the dividing line between police and ICE? Anybody you know that's an activist has been working to stop deportations probably has heard about programs like Secure Communities, 287G. These are very, not very good names. They've kind of tried to improve it over the years. But all of these programs were essentially trying to deal with the logistical hurdle. And what used to be, well, how'd you get caught up? Oh, well, a raid. You started talking about workplace raids, talking about Patel, Iowa. Some people then, you get arrested. Well, where do most immigrant communities are in working class communities or people of color communities that are over-policed. So you're gonna most likely get caught up in the criminal justice system. But what started happening later was, well, what happened? How'd you get caught up? I don't know. I was Netflix and chilling. I don't know. I just paid my taxes. So what started happening? So we started to have to ask the question, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? And today we have a story in the New York Times of a woman, Gladys, in the state of Washington, sent a Facebook message to someone who wanted to buy a piñata. She sends a Facebook message to sell this piñata. She's a mother of 3. She goes to meet the person. She would have made $20 making that sale, and instead she encountered ICE agents. She was taken, disappeared, and deported within 3 weeks. And that is the danger of the wholesale introduction into technology companies and data companies, and that is why we started, really researching and trying to understand this problem, and what led us to really build up the No Tech for ICE campaign and the campaign to really target Palantir. Mm-hmm.
RUHA, I'm going to turn it back to you for a moment. So one of the big topics in criminal justice circles right now is the need for racial reckoning. And on that topic, Brian Stevenson had said that you can't disconnect the death penalty from the legacy of lynchings, and you can't disconnect the legacy of lynching from the legacy of enslavement. Is there a connection between these legacies and the legacy that AI is leaving behind in the criminal justice system? And if so, how do we stop that vicious cycle?
Yes and yes. So there's always a connection between past and present. But there are at least 2 features of racist systems that make it hard to detect these connections. One, racism is an amnesia-inducing technology. It's designed to make us forget. Likewise, if modern racism has an aesthetic, I would call it minimalist chic, because it allows for more and more racist violence to be less and less discernible, operating under our noses. So now enter AI systems that facilitate this racial minimalism, allowing it to penetrate every facet of social life, lethally undetected, under the guise of progress, innovation, upgrade. Rather than a racist judge, prosecutor, policeman, border patrol officer to which we can point, we have predictive analytics that create proxies for race, calculating the extent to which someone's life has been structured by racial domination without ever asking an individual's race. Algorithmic alibis facilitating this racial denial. So one of the fundamental design principles of AI and racism alike is that both are in the business of predicting the riskiness of individuals and groups, high-risk parolees, at-risk students, high-risk patients, rather than focusing on the institutions that produce risk in the first place. So if we go back to Brian Stevenson's provocation, AI in the carceral system is akin to drapetomania. How many of you have heard this term before, drapetomania? So it was coined by famed physician Dr. Samuel Cartwright in 1851 to describe a curious mental condition causing the enslaved to run away. What's more, drapetomania had a predictive component insofar as Cartwright shrewdly surmised when the enslaved are mistreated or beaten too severely, that makes the condition appear, and they want to run away. In leading medical journals. So despite the fact that fleeing is a rational, incisive response to an unjust system, rather than diagnose the institution of slavery as sick, science is used in this case to pathologize people trying to survive it. Like our modern day predictions, those invested with the power of prediction would rather diagnose the riskiness of individuals, calculating their likelihood to commit a crime, return to trial, recidivate, rather than focus on the underlying injustices at work. But this is the algorithmic sleight of hand. Carceral technologies actually don't predict crime. They produce them by encoding historical patterns of racist policing and criminalization into supposedly race-neutral code. So we can think of AI as a kind of digital drapetomania.
So if there's one takeaway from Kate and Meredith's presentation, it's that there's no easy technical fix for human bias in AI. So knowing that, what is your vision of change when it comes to the use of AI by the police state? And Marisa, I'm going to start with you.
So I just want to quickly pick up on Gladys. So part of how did they know to go there? And so what happened in that case is you had agents just parked around neighborhoods where they're mostly immigrant communities, punching in folks' license plate numbers, creating, essentially, investigating people. And so Palantir is a company that, my shorthand, non-technologist way of saying is like they build Facebook for policing. And this company has 29 active contracts with the federal government, totaling to about 1.5 billion. So we've been running a campaign to target Palantir, really as to make an example and to really shine a light on a very large and expansive, increasingly growing system. A system where we are seeing high-tech policing, low-tech democracy. We are facing an all-seeing state that is veiled in secrecy. And so part of our advocacy is to get Palantir to cut this contract so that ICE is not able to have a 650% increase of their workplace raids in this country. But we're also trying to spark a wider conversation about what is happening in your neighborhood, what's happening in your city, what kind of contracts are being initiated by your local or state governments with these types of technology or data companies. And so we've been running this No Tech for ICE campaign, have been targeting the company, and most recently in terms of a vision, we're living in a time that's, it's very difficult to win something positive at the federal level. I don't think I need to explain why. But there is the old adage is don't more and organize. And that is what we have done. And by targeting companies like Palantir, which essentially represent the enablers of the Trump agenda. And in a time where it seems like all roads are blocked, we have to do what people who organize have always done, is find a way where there is no way. And it's beautiful to see alliances between community members, immigrant communities, communities of color, with workers, tech workers, service workers, warehouse workers, and students. And so one of the latest phases of the campaign that we've moved is a tactic really bringing students in. So we have over 2,000 students who have pledged not to work for Palantir, essentially tech workers saying, we will not build it. And these students are on almost 30 campuses across the country. And so for us, that's what we see as a vision to be able to continue. We have to both shine a light, but we have to organize and we have to pressure these companies to do the right thing.
Christiane, so from where you sit, you've seen how these algorithms work. What's your vision for change?
So I think, what did you say a second ago? They don't predict future crime, they predict?
Produce it.
They produce it. Yeah, what we often say in our sort of pithy thing, because you said that, it reminded me of this, is they don't predict future crime, they predict future policing, right? And I think it's something similar. And so, I think one of the things that I think we have, if we want to use AI in this space where there is a lot of data, right? And I think these sorts of institutions keep really good records about themselves. And so I think if we're going to be using it in the future, my vision would be to sort of turn it back on itself, right? To sort of get back to to use the AI to get back to the institutional policies that are causing these problems, to ferret out police officers who are very likely to have use of force complaints against them, to sort of reveal the sorts of patterns that we see in the data, like that the use of pretrial detention actually compels guilty pleas that wouldn't have otherwise happened. So use the criminal justice data because they're keeping great records about themselves, right? Maybe not great. Maybe the data's not in a great format. I don't need to go down that road. Sorry, captive audience here. Let me tell you about all the problems I've had data munging. Gosh.
That's a whole other panel.
Really? Because we've got 51. No, just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you guys. I'm sorry. But yeah, so taking the data that exists and turning it back on itself and sort of changing the questions we're asking and what we're asking the AI sort of technology to do and answer for us.
RUHA, you got this off to such an eloquent start. Why don't you close it out for us and tell us about what you see as the path forward?
Sure. So laws, yes. Litigation, yes. Organizing, yes. Education, yes. So as an educator, that's my ground zero. That's the sandbox that I play in. So for all the students listening, I would encourage you not to wait until you've entered the real world to start making demands and organizing, and also practicing what we're preaching. So the world is here and now, so don't wait. I'm a student of Octavia E. Butler, who taught us that there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. We have to carve out mental and emotional space to not only react and critique, but reimagine and create. Practically speaking, for me, that means staying connected to the life-affirming work happening in our communities, which we've already heard about, which we'll hear more about. And in the words of Baldwin, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. Thank you.
What a wonderful way to close out. Thank you, RUHA. Thank you, RUHA. Thank you, Marisa and Christiane.
What a fantastic panel. And next up, we have a session on tenants against facial recognition. So I'm really delighted to introduce Mona Patel from Brooklyn Legal Services, who's been working specifically with tenants here in New York who are trying to stop facial recognition being inserted into their buildings. She'll be moderating our conversation tonight. Please make her welcome.
Hi, everyone. So, almost exactly a year ago today, the tenants at Atlantic Plaza Towers first learned that their landlord was trying to install face recognition technology in their building, in their homes. Atlantic Plaza Towers is for those who don't know, it's a two-building, 20-plus story complex in the rapidly gentrifying neighborhood of Brownsville in Brooklyn. When they first learned about it, it wasn't through the landlord. They didn't receive a letter. They didn't receive some type of flyer from the landlord saying, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you all think? They received notices from the state agency that oversees rent-stabilized housing in New York. Now, the reason for that is anytime an owner of a rent-stabilized building wants to create some type of change or modification of this caliber, they need to go through the state agency for approval. So the state agency sent these notices to the tenants with a yes or no. Do you want this? Do you not want this? No explanations other than as to what the technology is, other than attaching the landlord's actual application. The application, mind you, was 3 pages of basically nothing. It said they're proposing to install a biometric identifying system, and they, in parentheses, put in also known as face recognition. They also said it was manufactured by Stonelock, but no information about how many buildings Stonelock has already installed this in, or what its accuracy rates are, how well it works, or even a real reason as to why they wanted to do this, why they wanted this modification. Instead, they said they had allegations of safety issues the tenants are facing, safety issues in the neighborhood, without really pointing to any specific reason. It all was very borderline racist. Well, the tenants got organized like that. They set up an emergency tenant meeting. They knocked on their neighbors' doors. They got educated, and they collected signatures for a petition. By about end of this month, end of October 2018, they submitted over 400 notices to the state agency saying, no, we don't want this, deny their application. Having not heard anything from state agency or the landlord, the tenants then reached out to Brooklyn Legal Services, the Tenants' Rights Coalition, and we started researching with them. And I say with them because we had no idea this was even happening in New York. We didn't know there was buildings, and residential buildings especially in New York, that had face recognition technology already installed. First thing we learned, no laws protecting the tenants from their landlord being allowed to collect and store their biometric data. Second thing we learned, there's serious irreparable harm here. If this biometric data, if each of the tenants is compromised, there's no turning back. That's their identity. And so we helped the tenants file opposition on May 1st, 2019, just earlier this year. It's a very exciting day. A group of tenants went out in front of the state agency and made it known that we are not going to put up with this. Really beautiful posters and flyers as well. But that opposition point, because there's no actual law that regulates this, the opposition pointed to all of the other underlying concerns here with irreparable harm, but also the fact that these type of technologies often self-police communities. They prevent people from organizing and moving, prohibit freedoms of movement and association, and in a building as big as this, where tenants have little control over other aspects of your life, other things happening in the building, that's a lot, because you need to stay organized in a building where you're fighting the guy with all the money. So that's that. I know you guys are actually here to listen to these guys and not me. So let me introduce you to two tenants of Atlantic Plaza Towers that were born and raised there. Trinae Moran is actually also raising her kid there, so it's 4 generations of Atlantic Plaza Towers tenants. Fabian Rogers still lives there as well. And yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to the two of you and ask, what motivated you in the first place? When you first got these notices, what motivated you to fight back?
Well, our apartment complex is, if you ask me, over-surveilled as it is already. So our building, we have key fob entry. So we tap 2 key point entries to enter the building. So you enter the first door, then there's a second door, tap, another door, tap, security guard, camera, camera, camera. Turn around, go to the elevator, camera, camera, camera. Get on the elevator, hi camera. Doing my jig after work because I want to. Get off the elevator, camera, camera. So camera is looking both ways down the hall on the actual floor that you live on. So I felt like we didn't need any more security. How much secure can we possibly get? Seriously. Yeah, so that was the pushback. It's like any piece of additional security you guys put into here, I will be living in a jail. I don't pay rent to live in a jail. I don't pay you to watch my every move. I don't pay you, no, I pay you for somewhere safe and comfortable to live that I have access to with my keys, and I would like to be able to get in it whenever I want to. I don't want to have to stand there, scan my face, and it's like, no, that's not you. That's not what you said you were 2 weeks ago. This is not you. No, I don't need that to happen, especially with a 3-year-old. He has to go to the potty all the time. So, and not just that, but we have a large population of elderly women in our building. First of all, the building is mostly Black and Hispanic, 80% women, and most of them are elderly.
90%, I think.
Could be 90%.
We collected the data.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Closer than 90%. So with all the research that I've done just on my own, and what I'm doing is very surface level in regard to what everyone else in this room probably does. But just with a simple Google search, like I found that this technology is not really made for people that look like me, and it's not really made to support or help or do anything positive for people that look like me. So why would I want this in my home? Like, why would I want to deal with this every day, like being denied entry and like, no, that's the pushback. A whole lot of reasons why we're pushing back. It's just.
And what about you, Fabian? What about like the community and outside of the building?
So I would definitely double back on what Trinae said, but just to save time, I guess the other point for me that I'd like to focus on is the simple fact that I was uncomfortable when I first heard about the process. Like, think about for a second that you hear about a new modification being added to the building, but it's not coming from your landlord, the person that's handling the modification. It's coming from a state agency. Nonetheless, the mailing system might be a little wonky, so it might take a few weeks before you actually see this letter in the mail, and you're looking at your residents like, hey, did you hear about this? And they're like, my mailbox is like broken. I'm sorry. So at the time when we first got notices from DHCR, we had mail issues and things of that nature. But what really made me uncomfortable was the simple fact that when I had a sit-down meeting with Nelson Management, his legal representatives, with several other tenants as well, in a private meeting because Nelson didn't want to deal with the whole tenant body of Atlantic. The problem became, after asking him several times over, what is the purpose of this technology? What are you trying to aim at with this? I tried as many times as I could before I had to curse or feel the need to have to curse to really get a legitimate answer out of Nelson. He basically came to the conclusion that this was more of a profit-based improvement, not necessarily security. There were no additional security improvements that would be done or given through this use of like technology. So what started to run through my head was the worst case scenarios of having to hear about Nelson in media through his interviews with media, just like we had been talking and going through our roles, talking to different news paper outlets. He'd given the conclusion that he wasn't going to do an opt-in or opt-out process with this technology. So as a tenant that has no real agency or control over the situation, and you're stuck kind of in a corner with other tenants that are looking at you as well, like, well, what are we gonna do here? You come to the worst case scenario of, am I gonna get evicted by chance? Is this technology for me, or is it for the people that can afford the modifications that come with this apartment and the market sharing boost that Nelson might get if he flips this apartment over because he can get me out of this place through not having an opt-in, opt-out contract. So it's the worry of having to deal with possibly having my apartment accelerate in the gentrification process just for the simple fact that I would choose not to, participate in the process of dealing with this technology and just having the worries of eviction in the back of my head after growing up in this building for years and years and years and not really planning to leave anytime soon. So that's really...
Yeah, and that meeting you mentioned with the landlord and his representative, I recall them saying that was 100% accuracy rate.
Yeah. And,
yeah.
And so...
100%.
And this is the funny part is like, the representative that was representing the interest of Stone Lock, which is the security system that's being installed in our building, the guy there, he basically wanted to say, we had 100% efficacy in our technology. Besides the fact that Stone Lock doesn't have any release validation studies on their security technology, we're one of the first private living complexes, residential complexes that would have this technology in there. So to have this sort of downright 100%, we're good to go, it sounds a little wild. And on top of that, just out of the sheer fact that Nelson nor Stone Lock wanted to help us on figuring out what we were dealing with, just doing our own research on our own and having other tech experts, data analysis, data scientists and things of that nature, helping and giving us information, their research showed that there's not any technology currently out that has that type of efficacy anywhere, and especially for black bodies. So there's a big discrepancy here that we never got the chance to really get over.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Rashida Richardson and AI Now, because the three of us and a couple other tenants and folks from our team at the Tenants' Rights Coalition jumped on a call with her and asked the most basic questions. What is this? Mm-hmm. What do they mean by biometrics? Can something happen to this encrypted storage space? We were kind of lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had no idea what it was about,
Yeah.
the technology itself. So, but since then, since May 1st, since the opposition has been filed, the tenants have inspired legislation. There's... Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. There's currently a federal bill pending on banning face recognition in public housing. There's a state bill in the Assembly and State Senate pending that would ban the use of face recognition, period, by landlords across the state. And there's currently 3 city council bills dealing with face recognition. One in the commercial sector, it would require putting up a notice. Another one would require landlords to register. And the third one would require landlords to provide a metal key in addition to the face recognition so tenants can opt out. But there's no actual ban in any of those 3. So legislation pending.
Lots of work to do.
Yeah, so that's my question. Lots of work to do, huh?
Yes.
There's legislation pending, opposition. We're still waiting for a decision from the state agency. What now for you guys?
We are still fighting the good fight, okay? The bills that were presented, it's a great step forward, but there is still some verbiage in those things that need to be tweaked and just still things that really need to be worked out. Actually, this coming Monday, we are going to a city council housing and buildings committee meeting because there was some new legislation that we found out about. So you guys are more than welcome, if you are free on Monday, to come out and support us in this fight, because it's not just for us in Brownsville, it's for everyone. There's no regulation anywhere for facial recognition or just any of this new cool stuff that's happening. There's no one holding any responsibility for it if something were to go wrong. So there's just a lot to do, and we could use your help. And you can help simply just by talking to like local politicians or legislators, just like saying the words facial recognition, because people just are not thinking about it. Like this room, yeah, we're like all there, but outside of this room, they're like, oh, Snapchat, oh, Instagram, no, not exactly that, but on a deeper level. So just talking to people about it and informing people that this is happening right now.
And just understanding that just because there are bills out there, this isn't the end of that sort of endeavor, because a lot of these bills have to deal with different jurisdictions of where they touch, who they cover, who they protect, and what we understand is that there are many holes even within the bills that are currently out there. So the fight that we have to make is to continue to have more bills cover more ground, essentially, because there are many tenants that'll be caught in the loopholes that landlords can take advantage of, unfortunately. So we would really like it if you would be mindful of that.
And I would also add that the reports and the studies that came out of the tech experts and the AI experts that we spoke with were extremely helpful.
Yes, Joy Bolomwini, I hope I got that extremely right, because you have been like very helpful to me in my search in all of this tech stuff that I was not into before having it almost in my apartment complex. So RUHA, like I thank everyone who is just doing the work and relaying that information to us. And what would be easier is if people could like directly send like information to people like Mona who are helping in the good fight, just so we have access to that information, because just finding the information is kind of hard on where we are. So because we don't always know what to Google or what terms to use or what to look for. So just getting us normal, non-techie people information would be awesome.
And simplified language.
Yes, in the most simple way possible.
All right, well, y'all have your homework. Thank you.
That's it.
So for our next panel tonight, Automating Judgment, Kate Crawford will be in conversation with Jennifer Lord, talking about what it takes to push back against broken and biased algorithms using the law and the courts.
Have a seat.
Thank you very much.
So I am thrilled to be here with Jennifer Lord. Jennifer is here for our spotlight session. This is when we invite a person who has inspired us over the course of the year, and we want to know more about what they do and how they do it. And I mentioned at the start of tonight what's been happening in Michigan with the MITRE system. Well, Jennifer Lord is that civil rights attorney who has been doing this work and actually standing up for the people whose lives have been completely devastated by getting these completely incorrect judgments. So Jennifer, why don't you tell us a bit about the case and what it's been like working on this?
So the case came to us as a total surprise. My firm practices employment law and civil rights. So basically, we represent people who've been fired from their jobs because of their race, because of their gender, because they have a disability. And in late 2013, early 2014, our phones started ringing off the hook. And the story was always the same. I've been accused of fraud, followed by, my tax refund has been seized, followed by, oh yeah, I got a new job, but now my wages are being garnished 25%. And then we get a call a week later. I just got this bill in the mail. The Michigan Unemployment Insurance Agency is saying I owe them $80,000. So we did not know what was going on. We only knew that something was very, very wrong. And so we reached out to our colleagues across the state of Michigan who practice the same type of law, and everyone was experiencing the same thing. So our first hint that something was wrong was when we started doing some research, and there was a press release from the agency saying that they had rolled out this $46 million algorithm called Midas, the touch of gold, which it was completely not the touch of gold.
Yeah, kind of the opposite.
Exactly. And they nominated themselves for a national award for rolling this system out in record-breaking time. So we realized then that we're going to have to start practicing a new area of law. We're going to have to start figuring out what was going on. And we still had yet to learn, the vast impact this had had. Up to 40,000 people were falsely accused and adjudicated. More than $100 million was seized from these people. And so it was just a very slow but push-forward learning process that kind of even just opened up the onion on this mess.
So tell me a little bit about how you even research a case like this. I mean, obviously the system itself is hard to see from the outside. You're getting all of these calls. How do you begin that process of even just getting the facts on the ground?
So hint number one was that press release. Then we realized that this was something that a state agency had done, and because it was done by a state entity, that there had to be some sort of public records. We also got really lucky. In 2016, this is more than a year after we filed our class action lawsuit, the Michigan Auditor General issued 2 reports that were extraordinarily critical of the agency. And that's where we were finally able to say with confidence that 40,000 people are impacted with a 93% false charge. 93%. And so here's the state admitting that they had done something wrong, admitting that they'd harmed all of these citizens. And beyond that, we've tried to subpoena and FOIA as many records as we can. We're at a bit of a standstill because although we won at the Michigan Supreme Court, we got sent back to the Court of Appeals to decide another technical legal issue. So we're still stayed and we can't get our hands on all of the documents, but I can only imagine what we're going to find once we're able to fully access all of the documents.
So this is ongoing, and we're really talking about sort of 40,000 plus people who've been affected by this pretty disastrous system. Tell me a little bit about how people have been responding. What are the sort of the human experiences of being on the other side of Midas?
Sure, that's one of the hardest things to talk about because our firm has talked to thousands of people. I personally have talked to hundreds. We've held organizational meetings, met with them. There have been 1,100 confirmed bankruptcies. Those are bankruptcies that the state of Michigan acknowledges because they went into court and filed something called an adversary proceeding, which meant they fought the discharge of that bankruptcy even when they knew the debt was false. There have been hundreds of prosecutions and hundreds of people who pled guilty to a crime that they didn't commit. Again, the state attorney general at the time, like the Republican governor who oversaw this whole program, was outsourcing the prosecution of these innocent people in the 2 poorest cities in the state of Michigan, in the city of Flint and in the city of Detroit. So now we have all these hundreds of people with a crime on their record. Their credit rating is damaged. They can't find an apartment. They can't pass a background check to get a job. It has upended people's lives, and it still happens for them. So even though the state will say, oh, we stopped using that program completely in 2015, and we hired back a few of the 400 fraud examiners, because that's another really important thing to know, is when Midas, this golden touch, went online, the agency fired all of its human fraud examiners, 400 people. So this computer was operating completely without oversight.
which is extraordinary if you think about it. I mean,
It is.
again, these systems are not really designed to really be able to look into the deep context of somebody's life. And so you think about what can happen when something like that is just running rampant. I mean, it's absolutely shocking to me. But tell me something about the politics here, because obviously there was an election which has changed things. And I'm curious where things are at now and if there's lessons that we should all be taking here as we go into 2020.
Sure, I think the biggest lessons, before we start with the election that we just had, are to go back and look at the government in Michigan from about 2011 forward. We had a Republican governor, Rick Snyder, who's internationally known for being the face of the Flint water crisis. And he owned and was the CEO of Gateway, a giant tech company. And so he approached his job as, for lack of better words, governing by spreadsheet. So his vision was, let's treat the state of Michigan like it's a corporation, and let's maximize the value for shareholders. And what I think really got lost is that when you're governing, the citizens aren't shareholders. I mean, the first job of our government is to do no harm. And that's one of the major things that got lost. And I think lessons that should be taken going forward, not just in Michigan, but across the country and across the world. Another major lesson is let's slow things down. Obviously, technology is here. That train is not coming back into the gate. But we have to have human oversight. We have to have input from researchers and from outsiders. And we just really, as human beings, have to ensure that we're not permitting, and this is the third point, the outsourcing of government benefits to private companies. So in Michigan, a giant corporation called SAS developed this Midas software. And so in essence, here's this government who's outsourcing who gets unemployment benefits and who doesn't. And I think that's just fundamentally wrong. There were other problems that we learned, especially in Michigan. There was a 400% penalty. That's since been changed. But we need everyone coming together. We need researchers. We need academics. We need lawyers. We need people who are going to start to speak out and get out of all of our collective comfort zones. When you run into something like this, we need to be trying to talk to the media. You need to be going to your senator or your congressperson, finding out where they're having office hours, going and talking to them and explaining to them the problems that come from this unfettered abuse of AI.
And I think that point is incredibly important, is how do we build those coalitions and how do we bring those researchers together with advocates, with lawyers, with people on the ground who are actually experiencing these systems. And that's something that, again, we really hope comes out of events like this. Absolutely. And I just want to thank you for the work you've been doing. It's been incredibly important. Please give Jennifer a big hand. Thank you. So next up, I would like to introduce my colleague Meredith back onto the stage. She is going to be chairing a knockout panel tonight on organizing in tech. Make them welcome.
Thank you, Kate. And I'd like to welcome our panelists tonight. I have been looking forward to chairing this panel for months, which isn't usually something I say about chairing a panel. But these are some of my heroes. These are people who've been doing such exceptional work. And I'm honored to introduce BHAIRAVI DESAI, who is the founder of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, Veena Dubal, a powerhouse who's associate professor of law at University of California, Hastings College of Law, and so much more. And Abdi Muzey, the executive director of the Awood Center in Minneapolis. All of these folks in different ways have been organizing and working with tech workers. And this panel is really here because we want to look at tech worker organizing beyond the headlines. There's a lot of focus on white-collar organizing, but this is going to look at the app-based drivers, the warehouse workers, and the people who have both carved the path and had some significant wins this year. So I want to open up the panel with a first question that I'd like each of you to answer, which is really just tell us a little bit more about your work and how you see it fitting into this broader pushback against tech and tech-enabled worker exploitation. And Abdi, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you. 4 years ago, Amazon moved to Minnesota, Twin Cities, and they opened 4 locations, and they intentionally and heavily recruited from East African community. They offered free busing from our neighborhoods to the warehouses, and everybody was happy, and they were expecting good, safe, and reliable jobs. Quickly, we learned that was not the case. Amazon jobs were really highly stressful. Workers were complaining about inhumane rate, which led a lot of injuries. We'd also led a lot of, fear because workers were losing their jobs. They set a rate, and the rate made by set by the tech workers in Seattle. And if you are a tech worker in the audience, please know that you have tremendous power to help workers and to make the world a better place, and also to hold corporations accountable. So the rate was the key issue for warehouse workers, and that led a lot of termination because they have a rule: if your rate goes down 3 times a day, you are out, no matter how long you work there. That career really, if you are someone who have a family, and most of the immigrants in the community, they support their family members back home, that means next day you don't have a job. And that means many of them, they really debated, should I go to the bathroom, or should I really work hard to keep my really rate, to maintain my rate, so I can support my family here and back home. That was the situation that Amazon workers faced. And they had no other choice but to speak up, to fight back, and to organize. And they led organic workouts, and then they reached out to us. We provided technical support. But the real heroes of that story are the warehouse workers who really said, no, enough is enough. Amazon, we want you to treat us like humans, not like robots.
And BHAIRAVI, I'd love to put this question to you. How do you see your work with taxi drivers over the years, and now with taxi and app-based drivers, as playing into this larger tech movement?
Well, so we've had a really unique unity campaign in New York City. New York City has the biggest taxi and for hire vehicle industry in the entire continent. And we've worked to build a solidarity between yellow cab drivers, livery drivers, green cab drivers, corporate black car drivers, and Uber and Lyft and other app drivers. And so the first stage of our unity campaign was winning a historic vehicle cap last year, which, last year was a really painful, It was a really painful year because in the course of 12 months, we had seen 9 driver suicides in our industry. And the suicides were across the industry. There's a black car driver, livery drivers, app drivers, and yellow cab drivers. And so, because there's been such a tremendous race to the bottom, and so we fought for the vehicle cap, which we saw as a life-saving victory, and we fought to raise the rates by which app drivers are paid as the majority workers in this industry. Drivers have been on the front line of change for past 40 years. 40 years ago, when this economy really went into independent contractorship and kind of the original push into the gig economy, it was taxi drivers who went from being commissioned employees to independent contractors. We see ourselves on a similar front line today. Uber and Lyft spent more on lobbying in 2016 than Amazon, Walmart, and Microsoft combined. And so, the disparity, the economic inequality between the average, pay of an Uber driver compared to what the Uber CEO makes, it's 5,000%. So we know we're on the front lines of this economic shift that's going to lead to a race to the bottom, really cutting away of basic fundamental employment rights for millions of workers across this economy, and really, deepening that divide of economic inequality, which is such a stranglehold across our society. And so, like warehouse workers, we've been fighting back, and I think the uniqueness of our struggle in New York City is we recognize that our fight, it's with the bosses, it's not with fellow workers. And unless we band together, we're not going to win this fight.
Yes, it is, my friends. Veena, I would love to put that question to you. You've been so integral to the tech workers movement and done so much work behind the scenes for so many efforts. So, you can choose any number of ways that your work is fitting into this pushback.
So I started in this sort of world also through the taxi industry. After September 11th, I was struck that there were workers in the taxi industry that I was interacting with, members of my family, people that I knew, who were laboring for 12 hours a day, who were not even going home with as much money in their pockets as they left the house with. So they were actually going into debt. And it was an eye-opener for me. I thought, wow, how is it that in America you can work for 12 hours a day and go home in debt? I thought we had the minimum wage. It took me to law school. It led me to start a taxi worker organizing sort of center at a nonprofit in San Francisco. And I ultimately did my dissertation work on this independent contractor behemoth. How is it that this even exists? Where did it come from? And what can we do about it? Soon after I finished my dissertation, Uber and Lyft hit the streets of San Francisco, and the workers that I was doing research on and working alongside were at the very forefront of the fight against these companies. I don't think that anyone quite realized in that moment in 2012 what we were looking at, that we were really facing not just the dehumanization of thousands, millions of workers in San Francisco, but actually an exploitative business model that is independent contracting, where it met with the massification of app-based technology. We were seeing that exploitation spread all over the world, from the streets of San Francisco to the streets of Bombay. It happened very, very, very quickly. The small but mighty group of workers that I was working with at that time have been at the forefront of that fight since then, and we've since that crazy time now been at the forefront of a huge victory. California was the first state in the country to pass a new law, you might know it as AB 5, that makes it much more clear that gig workers are employees for purposes of state law.
It's so major. I want to turn back to you, BHAIRAVI, because you founded Taxi Workers Alliance in 1998, so way before these platform apps came onto the driving scene in like 2013, if I recall correctly. And so I would love to hear a bit about your experience of how did that change the industry, and how did that change your organizing, and what are the things we can learn from that firsthand experience as we all think about organizing in and around tech?
Well, we're very much a movement interrupted. In 2012, the Taxi Workers Alliance in New York City had just won our biggest living wage campaign, where we were literally going to see a raise for driver incomes by about $10,000 to $20,000 within a year. We'd won this historic portable health and benefits fund. We'd established new regulations on the taxi industry, first time ever in this country. And we really believed that within the next few years, we were going to reach our ultimate goal of collective bargaining and full unionization, which has been our mission since we first started in '96 and then formed our organization in '98. And then came Uber and Lyft and Wall Street wealth, and everything just really changed. We saw the crisis of poverty begin to trickle in, especially in 2014. By 2016, we saw that poverty spread to across the entire workforce of 100,000 professional drivers in New York City. We're talking about massive, bankruptcies, foreclosures, evictions. I mean, we've had, Uber and Lyft members who were, because they were victims to predatory leasing with the vehicle rates, who had been in homeless shelters for up to 6 months at a time, to drivers talking about food scarcity, to people just like living in their cars and sleeping at the airports overnight. We saw such high levels of depression and despair, and eventually we started to see the suicides. And so the work has changed so much because we've had to reimagine this industry, what it's going to look like. We've had to go from building really like ethnic-based solidarity in an industry where drivers come from 100 different countries, and we call ourselves the working class United Nations, Back in '98, when we had our first historic strike in the city of taxi drivers, India and Pakistan, and 60% of drivers here are South Asian, while we were out building solidarity on a strike, India and Pakistan, wanted to test the nuclear bomb on each other. And so that's how much we had overcome, right? Now we had to go on to build that solidarity among sectors of workers in an industry that had all been pitted against each other. And we had to reimagine what this industry would look like when the yellow cab sector, which we had devoted our lifetime to organizing, was no longer the market dominant sector. And so now we had to organize a different subsector in order to raise the standards and have that be the new standard bearer. And so just on a policy level, practically speaking, everything really changed, But and I know my colleagues up here can also bear witness to this. When in doubt, you let the workers lead. Workers always know. Yes, workers know. They're out there building solidarity with each other, at red lights or at restaurants or at hotel queues. They know that in order to prosper, they have to band together. And nobody knows the inside of an industry better than a worker. The bosses are far removed. They're never the people that really know their own industry. And so we came out with, political platform, but I have to tell you, last year, in 6 months, we had 26 street actions. And during that time, our goal was not to get the attention of the mayor or the council or anybody else. Our goal was to get the attention of drivers to not succumb to the despair. On every single e-blast and flyer we issued last year, we had a box with the suicide prevention hotline number. I could never have imagined in 23 years of organizing that we would have had to put down a suicide prevention hotline number on a flyer where you're also talking about policies and rallies. That's been at the heart of our labor struggle against the gig economy. It is so much rampant poverty and despair. Technology is just, it's been used as an excuse. The fundamental problem is the business model, not the technology. It's the business model that we're organizing to change.
Thank you, BHAIRAVI. I want to turn to you now, Abdi, and just talk a little bit about your organizing. I love the mantra, sort of trust workers. And you organize in a tight-knit community outside of Minneapolis. And you organize, against a company that is famously reluctant to make any concessions, to even nod their head at sort of, the most basic ethical requirements. And you've, won some pretty significant gains for workers. So can you talk a little bit about the community you're organizing and how you organized in a way that could win, against Amazon?
Okay, thank you. So to start with, organizing Amazon is really very difficult. And if you don't believe that, ask traditional labor unionists who will say, Amazon, forget it. But we, we were very lucky to work with a very tight community. Most of them are East African, Somalis, and they were around 60% of the workforce in the warehouses. The working conditions were so inhumane that Amazon did most of the work for us to really organize the workers. But the real heroes here who really led the way all the way down are the workers. And when you search, always trust the workers. That's so true, and I agree with you 100%. Workers came to us and they said, we had enough. We will fight back. Can you help us? We said, yes, let's do this together. So we formed a small organizing day committee at warehouse level. And we, at the beginning, we decided to really disrupt at the small scale level and see how far we can go. For example, one night we struck one section of a department for only 3 hours. Amazon estimated lost around $3 million for 3 hours only. And then workers realized, if we scale this up, we can also really force Amazon to listen to us. So after several actions, internal actions, Amazon decided to meet with the workers. And we facilitated that conversation quietly. At the beginning, we were just trying to address the real issue, like the rate, providing culturally specific prayer space for the workers, especially for Muslim workers during Ramadan, where they really work 14 hours or 16 hours, but they cannot meet the demand of the rate. It's so increased and so intense. They said we need different and humane treatment. We were asking very basic things at the beginning. But Amazon, because they have so much money and they're so arrogant, they refused to listen at the beginning. But when we took real action and direct action, they came to the table. At the beginning, we said, okay, let's see where this goes. And we had the conversation quietly, but they were not willing to address the core issue, which is the rate, the productivity issue. They said, forget about the rate. We can talk about other issues, but the rate is our business model is based on really pushing the workers to the limits. We cannot change that. Anything else we can talk about? So we said, okay, if that's the case, we'll walk away from the table. And that's when, and actually workers voted for this resolution. We said, Amazon is not willing to fundamentally address the core issues. Should we continue negotiating with them, or should we walk away from the table? Workers decided to say, no, we will go back to our protest actions, and we will build power, so Amazon will force you to listen to us. And that's how the workers really forced Amazon to listen. And eventually, other labor unionists and community groups and progressive communities supported us. But what made the significant difference were the workers. And they're the real heroes, and many of them really took huge risk. I remember Safia, she's a mother of 4, and she had a breast cancer, and she was recovering from breast cancer, and her manager told her, you need to work faster and faster and faster, and she wasn't able to do that. They fired her, and they said, you need to go out because you are not meeting your productivity rates. One of her co-workers, who was white, advocated for her and explained to the manager that Safia is actually recovering from a cancer and she cannot work faster than what she's doing right now. And so stories like that inspired us to really support and fight. And I'm pretty happy to really say that Amazon workers inspire other workers across the nation to really take action. Just yesterday, on my way to this city, I was reading the news, and workers in California was protesting, and they said, we're doing this because workers in Minnesota did, and if they did it, we can do it. If first generation immigrant to the community who have been here for less than 2 years can do this, we can do it. So I think workers will win, but I want to say that warehouse workers only cannot win. We have to build cross-sector solidarity. One example, in one case that I would like to point out, we sent our leaders to Seattle to meet with the tech workers in Seattle. And tech workers came to our actions and protests and like our strike and on the Prime Day. So that was really fascinating. And when we see tech workers who are willing to support us and warehouse workers who are building solidarity with the tech workers, workers make work happen. So we're so powerful and we can change, the future of work in America and around the globe.
So this is a great transition to my question for Veena, because Veena, I know you really because you've kind of bridged these worlds, the white collar office worker in tech and the drivers and the warehouse workers who are also working, in and around tech. They're being mediated by tech, something like the rate or the platform just telling them what to do. And I would love, to hear your thoughts about how you connect these sort of seemingly different organizing efforts and your visions for solidarity and for building a shared understanding of the human costs and opportunities of these technologies.
It's a great question, and I should say, I have been doing research both on white-collar tech workers and blue-collar tech workers, but it has not been separate research. I was drawn into the white-collar tech worker movement because of how engaged the white-collar tech workers in the Bay Area are with the Uber and Lyft drivers, with the gig workers, with the more blue-collar workers. So this is not sort of a theoretical connection, but a real-life connection. I've seen Uber engineers, for example, come out, support Uber drivers in our May 9th Uber strike, which BHAIRAVI co-organized on the streets of San Francisco in front of Uber headquarters, really putting their own jobs in jeopardy. I organized with a group of drivers in San Francisco called the Rideshare Drivers United. We have support from folks in the tech industry that come to our meetings every single week who offer and volunteer their time to grow solidarity between the white-collar and the blue-collar workers. And the question then is, well, why is this happening? 10 years ago when we were organizing in the taxi industry, we were never going to get someone from Lehman Brothers to come out and stand in front of city council with us and protest. And so, in my research, I asked this question, well, why do we see this happening? And the answers that I get from the folks on the ground are two things. One, the business models. BHAIRAVI alluded to the reality that this independent contractor business model that the gig economy is based on actually started in the taxi industry in the 1970s. Actually, sometimes even earlier than that. There are some cases where it happened in the late 1950s, right after Taft-Hartley. And tech workers, Meredith was part of this amazing Google walkout, which we haven't gotten a chance to talk about on this panel. But those tech workers, part of what they were protesting was the fissured workplace that they see in their own firms. The same independent contractor business model, the same sort of temp business model, the slothing off of employment responsibilities by corporations, the same thing that has been happening in the taxi industry, the same thing that has happened to Uber drivers, that is also happening internally within the white-collar tech force. And so I think that the folks that I've talked to have seen that similarity. They've also seen and shared similar concerns around the ethics of the tech industry. So Uber drivers are very concerned about their own privacy issues. They're concerned about the data that they're producing. They're concerned about their relationship to climate change and the fact that they're driving around constantly and what that might mean. And they share that with the white-collar tech workers. I interviewed a really amazing tech worker who, when I said to him, how do you choose between the ethical issues, the social justice issues, and the labor issues, the workplace issues? And he looked at me and he said, if we don't have power in the workplace, we will never have power over the ethical issues. Power in the workplace comes first. And that is why, that is why what Abdi is talking about, the intersectional, intersector organizing that we see happening in the Bay Area right now between people who are traditionally considered white-collar workers and people who are traditionally considered blue-collar workers is so powerful, because what is at stake is not just suicidal drivers. What much broader things are at stake. Surveillance capitalism is at stake. The climate is at stake. We're building power in the workplace and between workplaces to change so many things that are on the agenda for all of us when we think about what kind of world we envision.
Yes. So I'm going to close with 2 questions for each of you, and they're both equally important. So the first is, let's think about our positive future visions. In 5 years, if everything that you're working for in that timeline sort of happened, if the success was breathtaking, what does that look like, and how did we get there? And also, how can people support your efforts? Those are my 2. So maybe we can go down the line again and start with you, Abdi.
In 5 years in my industry, I would like to, Amazon workers and warehouse workers, and especially in workers in underserved communities, to have a voice at the workplace, to have a dignity, to have a safe, reliable jobs that they can really raise their families. And what can you do and what others can do? We're on the front lines. We're fighting for all of us. We need your support. As you know, as an immigrant workers leader, we believe that we are really reviving the labor movement. We're on the front lines, and we need your support. As the union density is going down, immigrant community and the organizing that's happening within the immigrant community is really what's energizing the labor movement. So I think from that angle, we need a lot of support, especially from the tech community, from funding-wise, all of that. Whatever you can do to support those who are in the front lines, it will be greatly appreciated, and it's going to help you too.
Yeah.
Well, for us, most immediately, we've been working on a debt forgiveness campaign for actually yellow cab owner drivers. And, I say this because for us, like, taxi drivers have been among the first casualties of the gig economy, right? And so it's really important that while these different industries are going through a disruption and a change, it's really important that we protect the workers that are already in those sectors and industries, as these changes are happening. I think what we'd like to see broadly is certainly the reassertion of labor law in our country generally. Yeah. Which won't happen until we do much more to remove money from politics. We need to see a real democracy within our workplace in order to rebuild civil democracy. We're the same union that led the strike in 2017 at JFK Airport against the Trump Muslim ban. And I think really, reimagining a transportation network that really balances both private and public transportation, which, companies like Uber and Lyft have been really out to decimate, that realigns that balance between private and public transportation so that transportation does not become increasingly a privatized right, only for those with more means and money. And I think that in reimagining transportation policy, along with reasserting labor rights, to us are very much 2 sides of one coin.
I mean, I'm going to think big. On a political level, in the next 5 years, I'd like to see big tech broken up. I'd like to see Taft-Hartley repealed. Mm-hmm. And once we repeal Taft-Hartley and break up big tech, I'd like to see much more, not just worker democracy, but worker ownership in this particular sector of the economy. And I will say that the way that you get there is definitely not individually. It's not just with your vote. It's by building solidarity in your workplace and from your workplace to other workplaces. So call BHAIRAVI. Don't just donate money. Call BHAIRAVI, call Abdi. I mean, these are the these are my heroes, but they are literally the heroes of the movement right now. They are on the front lines doing the most amazing work. Definitely donate, but also support them as workers. And I think that everyone doing that building solidarity individually has the potential to really change things, even if things don't change politically.
Yes. I could just sit up here clapping. Thank you so much for that inspiring panel and for those beautiful closing thoughts. We're gonna end the panel now, and I'm going to invite Kate up onto stage to say closing remarks. But I will let you all go back. Thank you again. That was amazing, and thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you, Kate.
Hi, sister.
Hey.
Well, we're reaching the end of our program tonight, and you might have noticed this is not your usual AI conference. Over the years, we've invited lots of people on this stage, from the people who make these systems to the people who run these companies. But it was becoming increasingly obvious to us that we needed to center the voices of people who are being affected by these systems, and also the activists and the advocates and the lawyers who are fighting for human rights and for due process. So that means I want to start with a very particular thank you to all of the speakers and the chairs who shared their work and their visions tonight. Thanks, Dave. I also want to say a little special thank you to our NYU family, to the students and to the faculty and to our area leads who have been really helping us build this research here at the AI Now Institute at NYU. It's been really extraordinary to be welcomed into this group, and I'm really excited with the work that we're doing. Thank you.
And I would love to thank our entire AI Now team. They are behind the scenes making this happen. There's no AI Now, there's no AI Now Symposium without all of them. And the happy news this year is there are too many to list out on stage. We have grown. I would also love to thank the team at Good Sense, Chris Wong at Objectively, and the Raven team who helped out so much with this event production. And I especially want to give a special shout out to Jen Fried, who helped with a lot of research for this. And a huge shout out to Varun Mathur, who was the designer of these amazing visualizations you saw up here tonight. And they are tech fellows at AI Now. And as every year, because she's been with us for all 4 symposia, Mariah, you see? Well,
yeah, Symposia.
University Institute. I want to give a huge, heartfelt thank you to Mariah Peebles, our sister, our director of operations. She is a force to be reckoned with, and she makes all of this happen. So I think with that...
Actually, I have one more special thanks.
Got it.
And that is to you, sister, because let's be clear, this has been a pretty gnarly year with all of the things going on with Google, and it has been an honor and a privilege to turn up and work beside you every day. So thank you. So, with that, we are going to have a final thanks, which is to you all for coming to this. It is actually your strength and your inspiration, your ideas that keep us going. This is really urgent work. It's the right moment to be doing it, and we could not do what we do without you. So thank you so much. Please stay in touch via the Twitters, via our mailing list, and thank you so much, and good night.